Biggest history mindfucks? In a similar vein to the ARPS example, when I was studying Egyptian history, one of my professors talked about research he had done on graffiti at the pyramids. One of the inscriptions was from a New Kingdom pharaoh, think Circa King Tut, which said to the effect, "The great pharaoh XX visited these pyramids and marveled at the mysteries of his ancestors. Egyptian civilization spanned such a great amount of time that they even forgot how they built the pyramids." Mindfuck. The pyramids were ancient history, even for Egyptians. The pharaoh was here for a good time. Call, bird, bird, snake, read, I, bird, snake. Napoleon marched his troops under the Brandenburg Gate in 1804 after he invaded Germany. Hitler marched his troops under the Arc de Triomphe in Paris during World War II as an act of revenge. Europeans have quite long memories. This is fantastic confirmation of the saying the difference between Americans and Europeans is that Americans think 100 years is a long time and Europeans think 100 miles is a long way. The time difference between when Tyrannosaurus and Stegosaurus lived is greater than the time difference between Tyrannosaurus and now. All my Tyrannosaurus vs Stegosaurus dino fights hate you and your facts. When Alexander the Great decided to attack the city of Tyre, he ran into a problem. Tyre was an island, and he had no boats. No matter, he had his men construct a bridge amidst the hail of arrows from the walls of Tyre. Then he crossed the bridge and conquered the city. 2,500 years later, the centuries of accumulated silt and sand have turned that man-made bridge into a full-scale, permanent geological feature. Tyre is, to this day, no longer an island. There are over 2,400 comments, but I hope some of you can see this. Mississippi didn't ratify the 13th Amendment, prohibition of slavery, until 1995, only 16 years ago. In a single afternoon, 40,000 Roman soldiers were slaughtered by Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae. A slaughter of this proportion in a single afternoon wasn't matched until World War I. When Hannibal led his forces through the Alps, he got to a point where the war elephants couldn't pass. Hannibal said frick it, built some roads for his elephants and went on his way. The Roman defense against war elephants was to cut off their trunk and cause them to panic. In the 1920s, Canada had a plan for a surprise invasion of the United States in the event of war. The plan was to move troops as far south as possible, then as soon as serious resistance was met, retreat to the border using scorched earth tactics. All this was to buy time for assistance from Britain and Japan. I've always thought that the inventors of basic things were kind of mindfuck inducing. Mathematics are impressive enough, but then you think about the guy lady who invented numbers with nothing to base it on but an abstract notion. Or the person who realized, hey, if I take the seeds from this wheat plant and mash it up, mix it with water, let it sit around for a little while, and then put it on a fire for a while, it tastes freaking delicious. It just puts into perspective how smart humans are to figure those things out. The fact that Newton got as far as you could in explaining physics with the mathematics he had at the time, algebra. When the math was no longer sufficient, he invented calculus. In Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries, people were occasionally afflicted with dancing mania, in which large groups would begin to dance in the streets, as if in a trance, often until the point of passing out. The phenomenon is well documented and is largely not understood. Flash mobs. We usually think of a cowboy as being a white man, but 30% of cowboys were black, poor, recently emancipated slaves trying to make a bare living. During 14th century career, Admiral Yi Sun Shin single-handedly stopped the Japanese invasion during Japan's conquest of Asia. In 26 naval battles, he didn't lose once and achieved flawless victory. Every battle, he was outnumbered, sometimes 100-1. There were many battles where he takes a handful of ships, 13, and defeats hundreds upon hundreds. He was able to do this because he was a master tactician and used every advantage he could find, whether it was wind direction, tide changes, boat formation, and natural geography. His achievements in history is unparalleled, yet not many people have heard of this man due to his birth surroundings. How he can win over 25 naval battles where he was outnumbered usually 10-1 in dominant fashion is one serious mind freak. Reminds me of Koreans playing StarCraft. Not really a minfuck, but has anyone wondered what the world would be like if the library at Alexandria had not burned down? Shortly before the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's son Robert was in New Jersey at a train station when he fell off of the platform and onto the tracks. Immediately a hand reached down and grabbed his collar, pulled him back onto the platform, and saved his life. Who was the man who saved him? None other than Edwin Booth, the older brother of John Wilkes Booth. Today you, tomorrow your father. The day after Thursday, the 4th of October 1582 was Friday, the 15th of October 1582. This marked the transition between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. Back in 401 BC, Cyrus I, a usurper to the Persian throne, hired 10,000 Greek mercenaries to help him in his takeover. Starting in Sardes on the Ionian coast, Cyrus and the army of the 10,000, as they were badly known, enjoyed a successful campaign across the Persian Empire until Cyrus was killed at the Battle of Cunaxa. The 10,000, their numbers now around 6,500, were then betrayed by Tissaphernes, one of Cyrus' allies, and their generals were captured and executed. Instead of surrendering, the 10,000 elected their own leaders and went about the business of fighting their way out of the empire to the Black Sea port of Trebizond, over 400 miles away, across deserts and through mountains, fighting off the Persian army the entire way. If you have ever read a book or seen a movie about a stranded army fighting its way out of hostile territory, it is based on this book. Sir Arthur Currie, a Canadian general, did not lose a single battle in World War I. He revolutionized troop cohesion and mobility by, and this is what fricks with my mind, giving each of his soldiers a map of battle location. At that time, the prevailing idea among militaries was that lowly soldiers couldn't possibly make use of a map. Meanwhile, this Canadian comes along and thinks to himself, no, I really think the whole knowing where you are thing is a good idea. Yeah, I am always lost in FPS without a fricking map. The events that took place between Cortez and Montezuma. The Spaniards landed in a world where people breathed fire, smoking tobacco, had hot and cold running and or plumbing, and built structures that dwarfed anything in Europe. The population of Tenochtitlan was around 150k, whereas London at the time was around 50k. When asked why they needed so much gold, Cortez replied, because we Spaniards have a disease called greed which only gold can cure. The clash of these two cultures has always fascinated me. My minfuck of this whole affair is the chicken, introduced by the Spaniards up in Mesoamerica, reached the Incan Empire before the Spaniards did. Several hundred years ago, a group of Maori set sail from New Zealand into the unknown South Pacific. Whether by luck or skill, they landed on a remote archipelago known now as the Chatham Islands. Some 500 miles away, they lost all contact with their fellow tribesmen on New Zealand and formed a tight-knit, egalitarian community known as the Moriori and lived in peace for over 100 years. Then, one day in the 1830s, a group of Maori, who had by this point established contact with English settlers, hitched a ride on a seal hunting ship and sailed back to the same island. Seeing its potential as a settlement, the Maori, as was their custom, slaughtered or enslaved every single Moriori. The Moriori did not fight back, they had never known violence. More people died from the 1918 influenza pandemic than World War I. Also, more people died in 1 year of the influenza pandemic than died in 4 years of the Black Plague. Yes, but that is largely due to the global population in 1918 being higher than it was in the Middle Ages, at the time of the Black Plague. So the influenza killed more people, but the plague killed a greater proportion. Ancient Spartans were fine with men loving young boys, as long as that attraction was based on an admiration of their character. Being attracted to them physically was disgusting though. That was what those perverted Athenians did. Not only fine, but encouraged. Men fought better in battle if the one they loved was fighting alongside them. They stood to lose more. About 70,000 years ago, the human population was reduced to near extinction, about 2,000 individuals. They also theorized that if that Spanish flu had broken out in the Middle Ages instead of the bubonic plague, we might not have made it either. The second deadliest war in human history happened in China, led by a man who considered himself the younger brother of Jesus. Yeah, as an add-on to that, at the same time the American Civil War was going down, the Typing Rebellion was happening. Civil War killed 600k. Typing Rebellion killed 40 meters. 40 million people. I've posted this before, but here's my favorite coincidence from history. On the 30th of March, 1981 there was an assassination attempt on President Reagan. Jerry Parr was one of the Secret Service agents on duty. In fact, he was the one that pushed President Reagan into the limousine after hearing the gunshots. While driving back to the White House, standard procedure since at the time it was believed the president was uninjured, Agent Parr noticed that the president was bleeding and ordered the limo to immediately turn around and go to George Washington Hospital. This decision no doubt saved President Reagan's life. Agent Parr had wanted to be in the Secret Service since a young boy when he watched a 1939 movie called Code of the Secret Service, with a young unknown actor playing the part of Agent Brass Bancroft. That actor made some more movies and eventually entered politics, becoming governor of California and later, President of the United States. Indeed, a young Ronald Reagan played a role in a movie which caused a young boy to make a career choice, and then save the actor president's own life 42 years later. Something similar happened to President Bartlett. My genome has been twisting and folding, recombining and mutating in a continuous string of organisms traceable back to an original replicator molecule. If I don't find someone to reproduce with, the chain will be broken after billions of years of successes. Now you made reproduction sound like a solemn duty. Frick. The Wild West, popularly portrayed as being a violent time where the law was at the end of a gun barrel and groups of bandits roamed the land, was actually quite tame. Murders and violent crime were very uncommon. Gun laws in the Old West were actually more strict than they are now. Washington's surprise attack on the Hessians at Trenton should have failed miserably. His army was spotted crossing the Delaware by some British loyalists late on Christmas Eve. They rode to the Hessian camp and asked to speak to the commanding officer. He was too busy with a poker game to be disturbed. They then asked for a note to be delivered with the message that Washington's army was crossing and the camp should be prepared. The Hessian commander couldn't read English though and just pocketed the note. He was later found dead with the same note still in his pocket. The two major aggressors of World War II ultimately achieved their economic goals. Germany is, arguably, the most powerful economy in Europe, and Japan, through technology and aggressive economic reform during the MacArthur years, has effectively created a great East Asia co-prosperity sphere. The cars made in the former Axis of Germany, Japan and Italy also stomp on the cars of the former allies America, England and France. Archimedes was a mathematical genius and, supposedly, single-handedly defended Syracuse against the Romans using his inventions. He died after a 2-year siege, and was so well known that the Roman generals had given their men explicit orders to not kill him. Archimedes was so intent on his work that, when found by a Roman soldier, his first words were, "Do not disturb my circles." This enraged the soldier so much that he ignored direct orders and promptly killed possibly the greatest genius of the ancient world. During Thomas Jefferson's term as president, the White House lawn was public space where people commonly had picnics, etc. One day many of these people witnessed the French ambassador moving several huge wheels of cheese into the White House. Thomas Jefferson became known as the Big Cheese. I find it interesting that the potato, historically considered a staple food of the Irish, Russians, and other European peoples, originated in the Americas and wasn't introduced into Europe at all until the 16th century. It's strange how readily Europeans assimilated the foods and crops of completely alien cultures. Tomatoes and corn too. A lot of the writing left over from the Viking Age in Norway is dong and fart jokes. Seriously, we have gay jokes whittled into wood. Back in the age of exploration, it was common for British and Spanish ships to drop mating flocks of goats and chickens on remote islands to develop a food source for future expeditions. These ships also dropped rats and snakes. Wiki the histories of Ascension and St. Helena Islands. Makes me wonder how many Galapagos-style ecosystems were ruined by this and what amazing and weird animals we will never get to see. Despite the huge amount of play they get in the movies and on TV, Sparta was only a major player in ancient Greece for some 300 years. Everything about Greek fire, those crazy dudes who whip themselves to show their piety, were just a few isolated cases right wrong. They traveled in groups thousands strong, murdered men who stood in their way, and for a few brief period were as highly regarded as the Pope. Speaking of popes, there was a period in the 14th century where the Catholic Church had 3 of them at the same time. The Catholic Church has had at least 3 African popes. At least one was an African native, and was possibly black. In 1951, a French village suffered from something called Saint Anthony's fire, suspected of being ergotism. 150 people went insane and hallucinated for 3 weeks straight. Forget smallpox blankets. Colonists committed far worse acts of genocide by releasing hogs into Native American lands. The pigs ate much of the natives' food stores and then went on to destroy much of their agriculture, hundreds starving as a result. The Colossus of Rhodes was 2/3 the size of the Statue of Liberty. In about 50 BC, Lucretius, a Roman philosopher, wrote a book about trying to understand the world through logic and observation. Not particularly unusual for the time, except almost all of the guesses he makes turn out to be right. Things Lucretius figures out just by using his eyes. 1. All matter is made of different kinds of atoms. 2. There is no such thing as an immaterial soul. Consciousness is held inside the matter of the body. 3. If the gods exist, they certainly do not intervene in the affairs of man. 4. The mind is connected to the body by long, thin nerve cells. No, really, most of the ideas he discussed wouldn't be picked up again until the Italian Renaissance, a millennium and a half later. Also, the way he describes the random motion of atoms has a lot in common with modern chaos theory. Also, the entire book is written in rhyming poetry. It's crap like this that makes me think that if the Roman Empire hadn't fallen, we'd have invented warp drive by now. The move westward on the Oregon Trail was a program that was massively supported by government funding. Now it's a prime example of rugged individualism and a myth used as a cudgel against ideas of social welfare. A couple more I just thought of. 1. The population of islanders has still never recovered to the level it was before the potato famine, because of emigration as well as starvation, but still. 2. Only a few hundred years ago, the complete pool of human science was so small that a well-educated gentleman could plausibly claim to just know everything. A full-time scientist could reasonably be expected to be an expert in every field. That's why there were all these cool M like Ben Franklin and Edmund Halley were running around inventing the crap out of everything. In short, until very recently, the entire sum of things humanity has figured out about the world could be summed up and memorized by one person. The Polynesians, who did a pretty good job of exploring and populating the Pacific hundreds and even thousands of years before the Europeans, landed in South America and returned to Polynesia with sweet potatoes. The evidence. 1. The sweet potatoes the Maoris cultivated in New Zealand, the Kumara, have been shown via DNA to have originated in South America. 2. Bones, found in an ancient campsite on a beach in northern Chile, have been found to come from a type of chicken that is native only to Samoa, suggesting that Samoans or other Polynesians were the ones who camped there. BTW, the Polynesians have been shown, linguistically and genetically, to have originated in Taiwan, so they didn't come from South America in the first place. Christopher Columbus was a freaking butthole. One example being the first crewman to spot land was to be awarded a pension for life, and Columbus falsely claimed it when they returned to Spain. Evil empires are only considered evil when they break down. If they keep their crap together, history considers them benevolent empires. When Cortez landed in Mexico, Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, and it was built in a swamp. Hold out your arms. Now, imagine that the entire history of the world was represented by your arm span. Starting from your left fingertip, life wouldn't appear until you got past your right shoulder, and you could erase all of human history with a nail file. During World War II, there was a Korean man fighting in the German army. He had been captured by the Japanese, conscripted, captured by the Russians, conscripted, captured by the Germans, conscripted, and then finally captured by the Americans, who sent him home. Biologically speaking, grains domesticated humans. It shaped our culture to plant it, water it, fertilize it, and protect it from competing species on every continent on the planet except Antarctica. So complete is human domestication that if grains disappeared now, Homo sapiens would likely go extinct. Lots would die off. Extinction probably wouldn't happen. We'd start eating algae and other less appealing plant matter before that. All throughout grade school I was taught that the British were 100,000% unjust in demanding taxes from the colonies, but once I hit college I was taught in American history the difference in point of views. Americans simply did not want to pay for the French and Indian War that they helped ignite. It blew my mind. To be fair, the colonists revolted against taxation without representation, and not merely didn't want to pay for the war. Some easy ones. Storms helped destroy Mongolian Chinese forces invading Japan twice. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't holy, Roman, or an empire. Presidents Adams and Jefferson both died on July the 4th in 1826 CE. In life they had been both friends and enemies. Chinese civilization is 4,000 plus years old. In the AD BC calendar, Jesus would have been born in 4 BC. The monk doing the calculations messed up. Early Jews were monolatrists, not monotheists. Furthermore, Jews did not build the Egyptian pyramids. Every grammatical structure in Arabic is found in the Quran. In c. 300 BCE Alexander the Great's empire extended from Macedonia to Egypt to Anatolia to the Levant to Mesopotamia to Persia to Bactria and finally to northern India. When they say the sun never set on the British Empire, they meant it. Monolatrism, belief in multiple deities but worship of only one. Expanded vocabulary get. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.